Welcome back to the channel, guys. I am Jim with Doesn't Pay Full Price, and today we are making something super simple. You saw the thumbnail, we're making soup. This one in particular I have made the last 3 weeks in a row. It only requires 2 ingredients and about 15 minutes of active effort. In the end, you should be left with at least 4 portions of delicious roasted butternut squash soup, perfect for your light fall lunch. So why are we still talking about it? Let's just make it. The main ingredient we're gonna need in this soup is butternut squash, and yeah, we all know what it looks like. Just go ahead and get the most phallic, obscene-shaped butternut squash possible, because all of the seeds are concentrated just in the base, and the rest of the squash is just pure meat. For this recipe, we are only gonna need 2 things, butternut squash and stock. And when you're making a recipe that only requires 2 ingredients, both of those things better taste damn good on their own. You could use frozen butternut squash. I am using fresh. I think it comes out just a little bit better. It roasts a little bit better, so I would go with fresh. This recipe is gonna move along pretty quickly, so the very first step is to get our oven preheating to 400 degrees while we tackle our butternut squash. The most difficult part of this entire recipe is gonna be peeling this butternut squash, but I'll show you how. The best way to cut this squash is to start by trimming off a little bit of the tip and a little bit of the base. That way you have 2 very secure platforms for the rest of your cuts. The easiest way to peel this for me, now that we have a very sturdy base, is to just use a sharp knife and just go very carefully around the outside, just taking off the thinnest piece of skin. If the skin isn't too thick and you feel very confident in your vegetable peeler, you can definitely give that a try. For this one, it worked pretty well. If the skin's too thick, or if you have a cheap vegetable peeler, you could break the blade. But do whatever's easier and safer for you. We're gonna set the top part of the squash aside for now, but for the base, we're just gonna slice it right in half vertically, exposing the seeds. We don't want those seeds in there. There's nothing much they can do for us, so just go get your biggest spoon, scoop them out in one fell swoop, and now you have just pure butternut squash meat. Now that all the seeds are out of the way, go ahead and take your base pieces, cut them into slices that are about 3/4 of an inch thick. We want to make sure everything is equal thickness, that way when we put it in the oven, it all roasts evenly. Do the exact same thing with the top portion of your butternut squash, just cut it into perfect 3/4 inch circles. If you don't feel confident cutting them into big circles like this, you can certainly cut it in half first, that way you have a nice stable base and your knife doesn't slide around, and then just continue cutting them with the same thickness. Go ahead and get yourself a sheet pan. I like to use one of these silicone baking mats just so nothing sticks. We're gonna put all of our squash onto one sheet pan, cover it with just a light drizzle of olive oil, and then get it in the oven. Super easy. We're gonna let these go for about 10-15 minutes and then flip them over, that way both sides get even color. Let them cook for another 10 to 15 minutes. All in all, you're looking at a cook time of about 20 to 30 minutes. You can give it a little test with your finger. Once your squash is nice and tender, they are done, and that's kind of almost it. It may not really look like it, but at this point, we are like 5 minutes away from eating. There's a couple ways to go about this. If you're using a blender, you could just put all your butternut squash straight into the blender. I'm using a stick blender or an immersion blender. I'm gonna get myself a pot that's big enough to hold everything and then just throw all the butternut squash right in there. The second ingredient in this 2-ingredient soup is stock. I just happen to have some chicken stock that I made a couple days ago, but don't feel any pressure if you don't have homemade chicken stock on hand. You can just as easily go to the store, buy good stock. You could use vegetable stock if you wanna make this vegetarian. Just make sure to spend a little extra money, get good quality stuff, because this is gonna be one of the 2 main flavors in your soup. I like to start by only adding about 1 cup to 1.5 cups of stock. That way I can blend it up a little bit, see how thick it is, and I can always thin it out with more stock later if I want. So go ahead and blend it up for about 30 seconds to a minute. See what kind of texture you're working with. Mine was just a little too thick, so I added another 1/2 cup of chicken stock. Blended it for about 30 more seconds, and that left me with a perfect creamy consistency. Not too thick, not too thin, it just kind of falls off a spoon, and that's exactly what you're looking for. This may look like soup now, but there is one very important ingredient that is missing. Salt. So if you remember, we did not salt the butternut squash before we roasted it. Depending on how much sodium is in whatever broth you use, it's gonna make a big difference at the end product. So we're gonna taste our soup right now, see where the salt levels are at, and then keep adding salt until just before you think it's gonna be too salty. Just for the sake of science, I'm gonna go 1 teaspoon at a time until I think I've hit the perfect ratio of salt, which for me personally, using my own homemade stock, which I know doesn't have a lot of salt in it, 2.5 teaspoons was absolutely perfect. If you're using store-bought stock, which tends to be kind of high in sodium, I would start with 1 teaspoon and then very slowly add a little bit more until you hit the perfect level for you. All that's left to do now is pour it in a bowl, top it off with that butternut squash pieces that you saved, and enjoy. I think this is pretty much perfect just like it is, but if you wanted to, I guess you could add maybe some balsamic vinegar and roasted chickpeas, or if you wanted to make it a little bit more decadent, add a little bit of heavy cream, or one of my favorites, add a little bit of coconut milk, ginger, and lemongrass, and you can take this as many ways as you want. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button on your way out. Also follow me on Instagram at Doesn't Pay Full Price, and we'll see you next time. So good.